Hi, I'm Jordan. Welcome to the 2013 Patriotic Day.
The last few weeks, the words "we the people" has taken on a very powerful meaning. These constitutional experts that you are about to hear have prepared about a 1-minute oral statement about a topic about the Constitution or the Bill of Rights. They've had to use lots of reading, writing, and speaking skills. They've had to formulate opinions about different topics. They had to back up their opinions. And they found out that it's okay to change your opinion as you're halfway through, as you get more information. After their speeches, we will have a 4-minute question and answer period. And Mr. Ron Roberts from our Superintendent of Chippewa Valley Schools and Robert Cannon, who is the Supervisor of Clinton Township, very graciously volunteered to come here this afternoon to ask the kids some questions about their knowledge of the Constitution. So I thank you very much for coming. This group of students here was working on the subject of what are the basic ideas about government that the founders had. And this group of constitutional experts are T.J. Brooks, Connor Hartson, Caleb Wagner, Vince McGuire, Donato Davila, and it's supposed to be Drake Hunter, except he got sick. And Ryan Savage was kind enough to read Drake's speech for him. So Drake was not only unhappy because he didn't get to come here today, he was also unhappy because he knows we have chocolate-covered strawberries for a snack and he's not getting one. So, all right, TJ, now it's your turn.
The 13 mainland colonies were ruled by a king for a long time. Like children, the colonies grew and flourished under British supervision. Like many adolescents, the colonies rebelled against their parent country by declaring independence. But the American democratic experiment did not begin in 1776. The colonies had been practicing self-government since the early 1600s. Before the colonists arrived in the colonies, there were already people there called the Indians. Some of the Indians lived peacefully with them, while others fought the colonists. The 13 main colonies had their own charters and/or constitutions, but these could not contravene British law. The colonies formed the Continental Congress when the problems between them and Great Britain became more and more pronounced, but this Congress did not govern the colonies. Although slaves had been sold in the American colonies since at least 1619, slave labor did not come to represent a significant proportion of the labor force in any part of North America until the last quarter of the 17th century. After that time, the number of slaves grew exponentially. By 1776, African Americans comprised about 20% of the entire population in the 13 mainland colonies. While slaves existed in the English colonies throughout the 1600s, indentured servitude was the method of choice employed by many planters before the 1680s. This system provided incentives for both the master and servant to increase the working population of the Chesapeake colonies. Now let's hear what Connor has to say about the founders, such as Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, and Thomas Jefferson's beliefs on a new government.
The founders believed that there are 3 natural rights that no one can take away, and they are life, liberty, and property. The founders knew that protecting the rights of the people was not an easy thing to do. They read a book written by an Englishman named John Locke, who saw that life would be very difficult without laws or government. John Locke wrote about what life would be like living in a state of nature. John Locke worried about the problems that might happen. He said some people might try to take away other people's rights. The stronger people might force the weaker people to do things the stronger people want. The weaker people might unite against the stronger people. Also, he said people would have natural rights, but their rights would not be safe. It would be very hard to live a safe, peaceful, and happy life in a state of nature. Now, Caleb will tell you about what a Republican government is.
A republican government is a government where the people rule themselves. The founders got ideas about this government from the Roman Republic, which existed about 2,000 years ago. The people can rule themselves in the Roman Republic, and today they use by voting, which I think is great and a form of direct democracy. They elect representatives to make laws that protect their interests too, although they, the people don't have to. Lots of governments around the world today do the same thing. The founders liked this idea because the Republican government allowed the people to rule and represent themselves through representatives. In a Republican government, you need people who want the common good of the community as a whole, and this is called civic virtue. Citizens with civic virtue are good for a Republican government because they put common good above their own self-interest. Now, Vincent will tell you what constitutional government is.
A constitution is a set of rules for our government, which explains how the government works. All countries have a constitution. Some are written, some are unwritten, and some aren't written at all. Studying the Constitution will help answer questions about our government and about our citizens. For example, the purpose of our government is to protect our rights. Our Constitution gives us a constitutional government, which means our government has limits or points we can't go on. Meaning, the president cannot do whatever he or she wants, and the people who run the government must also obey the Constitution. On the other hand, a dictatorial government has no limits. Countries that have dictatorial governments have constitutions as well. North Korea is a dictatorship in which you have no rights. For example, people who protest against the government are sent to re-education. Citizens are brainwashed and forced to say good things about their ruler. In the United States, that would never happen. Next, Natalie will be talking about the ideas the founders used in the Declaration of Independence.
The colonists had many problems with the British government. Continental Congress had many problems with the British government, such as the tea tax, a tax that was imposed on the colonists. That is why they have chanted no taxation without representation for many years. The First Continental Congress met in 1774 so that they can find ways to get the British government to change many laws that they have made, such as the basic ideas for the government and the people, and the exact reasons why the founders should be free from British rule, and the complaints against sent to the British king. The founders made a Declaration of Independence. They wanted to be free from these British laws. They don't want hasty laws. They want the opposite. They don't want to protect the soldiers. They want the soldiers to protect them. They want to believe in their rights. These people were called patriots. And some of the colonists wanted to protect the king's rights. My opinion would be that 1/3 of the colonists rejected the independence plan because they probably would have gotten better treatment than the patriots. These people were called loyalists. I can relate the story that was a problem that recently happened in one country. They made women wear a burqa, which is an item to cover their faces. There was a fire that happened in the school. 3 girls left the school unharmed, but an officer forced them to go back into that burning building and get this burqa on. But 2 of these women died. That is how unfair the British government was. And now, Ryan's speech about the first state government.
After declaring independence with King George, the founders had to make a new government. The people's ideas about state government included natural rights, republican government, and constitutional government. Their constitution was a higher law. Higher law means a lawmaker cannot make a law that violates or hurts the Constitution. The people made 3 branches of government: the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. They used separation of powers to divide the power up between these branches. The people gave most of their power to the legislative branch because it makes the laws and is closest to the people. The executive branch carries out and enforces laws. The judicial branch decides what the laws mean. The state constitution also added checks and balances. This system allowed the other branches to check on or stop a branch if necessary. In my opinion, that is a good idea so one of the branches doesn't take over. Most states wrote declarations or Bill of Rights. Bill of Rights is a list of the people's rights. That is what the first state governments were like. That was our Unit 1 presentation. We will now take any questions heard.
First of all, when I was their age, I wouldn't be up there doing that. I was so shy that even in high school, I remember one day in an English class taking an E on an assignment rather than standing before the class. And for those of you who know what I did for a living, I'm a retired teacher and I'm a politician. That's probably very surprising to you. So it takes a lot of courage for the kids to do what they're doing, and we have a lot of respect for them. That's first. Second of all of you are lucky. You won the lottery by getting this teacher this year. Your kids have one of the best experiences they can possibly have. My daughter had her years ago. In fact, my daughter opened this building as a preschooler and went all through here. And we had such wonderful teachers and wonderful experiences. And I've been coming back ever since I've been supervisor now, so this is my 13th year in this classroom. And I'm always impressed with the kids. I'm always impressed with everybody who's gone through their program. And third, this guy sitting next to me, he's going to crack some jokes. He is one of the funniest superintendents and one of the best, by the way. The school system is lucky to have someone of this caliber in the leadership role, especially in the changing times we're in right now. And what we try to do with your children and grandchildren is to give them questions to get them thinking in a little different way. The questions we ask, we don't necessarily believe to be accurate. And I'll demonstrate that with my first question. So let me start with TJ, who, by the way, his mother was a former student of mine. He was in high school. So TJ, I would like to be king. You were kind of critical of kings. I, on a day-to-day basis, get to run the township, but every 2 weeks I have to meet with 6 other people and convince at least 3 of them that what I want to do is correct. Why do you think I shouldn't be king and just go ahead with what I want to do all the time?
We had just gotten done with having a king, and the king had been making very unconstitutional laws with Parliament, and he taxed them for like everything possible to tax him for, and it's not very comfortable being taxed all the time.
Okay, well, what if I promised you I was going to not tax you, but I was going to tax some of your friends? As king, I could do that.
Well, yeah, you could do that, but that wouldn't be very nice. And
Do you think I'm better off having to consult with 6 other people before I make decisions?
Wait, can you repeat that?
Do you think I'm better off having to get 3 other people to agree out of 6 with me before I can do something? There's a better chance it will be fair?
Yes, I think that.
I feel so much pressure right now to say something that will make you laugh. Anyway, one thing I did notice is if I were the owner of a professional baseball team, I would want you kids on it because your names are absolutely wonderful as professional baseball players. Right down to Ryan, who's pinch hitting for Drake. Those are great names. And I would like to ask Caleb, next time you do that, could you read a little bit faster? That was a joke. Could you read faster?
Everything he said so far is a joke.
I'll just set that down. Is that better? Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. You know what I want to ask about? You talk a lot about a constitutional government or a dictatorship. Could someone just talk about what are the differences, in your own words, between those two?
A dictatorship is where there's a monarchy or a king or something ruling everyone, and there isn't really much things that you can do to stop the government from
making bad laws or rules against the citizens of this monarchy or bad government.
Well, I'm just thinking about it. Okay. So if you now had, like you said, there's nothing you can do in a dictatorship to stop them if they're making bad rules in our government and in our way of governing people, which is constitutional. What might you do if someone were making some bad rules and you didn't like them? And someone else can answer too. I mean, if you just want to share, I've been there with all of you, so someone else wants to be assertive.
What was the question again?
The difference between one constitutional, you make the rules, and in a dictatorship you don't. So if someone was in your constitutional government, like we have, was making rules you didn't like, what might you do about it?
We could just call them, email them, and make sure we inform them that this is unfair and we should have our rights. We shouldn't have our rights taken away.
Good.
Anybody have a different thing that you can do? Do you have the answers?
You can also mail it to them.
What about the next election night?
You can also not vote for them.
All right, well, your 4-minute time period is up, which means now pressure is on our audience because we are going to see if you are a smart fifth grader. And here's the question that this team came up for you. What are our 3 natural rights that no one can take away? Press 1 if it's life, liberty, and property. Press 2 if it's freedom, property, and equality. Press 3 if it's speech, expression, and press. And press 4 if it's liberty, religion, and petition. All right. All answers need to be in the next 5 seconds. And we have 70% of the people that did get the right answer of life, liberty, and property. Yeah. 70% of you are smart.
Don't feel bad if you get it wrong. We sometimes get it wrong too.
I looked at what he put on. You're not supposed to do that, kids. You didn't hear that.
All right, our next team of constitutional experts are going to be talking about how the framers wrote our Constitution. And our experts are Sierra Updike, Allison Booth, Zach Kaufman, Nick Pulcini, and Karime Vega-Sanchez.
Finally, we adopted a national government. The Articles of Confederation were our first constitution. The Articles of Confederation gave us a very weak government. We were also afraid to change it. We had just escaped the strong government of England. We, the people, now get to run our government. Our government has to protect our personal rights according to the Constitution, their life, liberty, and property. An important fight about this was Shays' Rebellion. In 1786, angry farmers gathered with Daniel Shay to fight against the Massachusetts government for putting people in jail if they couldn't pay taxes. State troops stopped Shays' Rebellion. After we had stopped that, a meeting was to be held in Philadelphia to discuss the weakness of the Articles of Confederation. The delegates were to decide what to do with the Articles of Confederation, to dispose of it, or to live the rest of our lives. Now to Allison how the Philadelphia Convention was organized.
The Philadelphia Convention was held in Philadelphia in 1787. The only people allowed to attend were white men known as the Founders. Some founders at the convention were George Washington, James Madison, and Benjamin Franklin. Other founders, such as Thomas Paine and Thomas Jefferson, were at the convention because they were in France. The purpose of the convention was to write the Constitution. They made some decisions before writing the Constitution. The decisions the founders made were, first, George Washington would be president of the convention. Second, each state, large or small, would count as one vote at the convention. Third, they would not do what Congress asked them to do to improve the Articles of Confederation. And fourth, they would keep their discussions private for 30 years. I think the thought of only having men as the founders is unfair. What is the difference between women and men? Women are as smart as men, could have done as good of a job, have done just as good of a job. Now here's Zach to talk about how the bigger states wanted more representatives in the legislative branch.
After America was a country, there was a huge conflict about how many representatives each state should get in Congress. The small states such as Delaware, Rhode Island, and Georgia thought that each state should have one representative. However, the big states such as Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Maryland thought that each state should have one representative per every 30,000 people. Neither states would give in. They argued and disagreed so much that they almost had a civil war. Small states wanted only one representative per state because they didn't want the larger states having more representatives. Therefore, the larger states would have more power than the smaller states. The delegates from the larger states said this was unfair, and that states that have more population should have more votes in Congress. Now here's Nick, and he will tell you how they solved this problem.
This is how they solved this huge conflict between the small and large states. In the Senate, which is a part of the legislative branch, each state got to send 2 members to the Senate. That made the small states really happy. In the House, another part of the legislative branch, each state got to send 1 member to the House for every 30,000 people there were living in their state. That made the large states really happy. I think the framers did an awesome job of solving this massive conflict. This was called the Great Compromise. I think this was one of the most defining moments in American history. If the framers didn't solve this problem as good as they did, there would have been a huge war. Now here's Kareem telling you about the 3/5 clause.
Another huge disagreement among the framers was about whether to allow slavery and if the slaves should count as part of the population. The framers agreed to the 3/5 clause that gave southern states the right to count 3/5 of their slaves for representation in Congress. This means they could send more representatives in Congress than if they were not allowed to count any slaves at all. The compromise also said that the nation government would interfere with the slave trade until 1808. This is why the framers agreed to support the Constitution. The northern framers were ashamed of slavery. Unfortunately, the slave trade was about people capturing Africans to sell them to Southerns. Plantation used slaves for their profits. Many slaves died on the ships they were brought over on. After the Civil War, the 13th Amendment abolished people from slavery. This is how the United States ended slavery. This is our presentation on Unit 2, We the People. Now we would take questions.
Okay. Alice, you talked about people keeping secrets for 30 years. Do you think it's possible for a politician to keep a secret for 30 years?
I think it's not possible because we have TV and the newspaper and the radio, and we read this book, The Kid Who Became President, and he said that he was an official because they knew everything he was doing.
Well, today it would be very difficult, right?
Yes.
What's the difference today and when the Constitution was formed?
Because they didn't have like TV or the radio or the newspaper, so they couldn't figure out anything. and they had their doors all locked in the building that they made it in.
Very good.
You know, Allison, I just want to follow up because you said that. I know you don't want attention on you, I can tell. But you said they kept that for 30 years. Now, see, I disagree because I was informed that Ben Franklin was a real fan of Twitter. All right, let's move off secrets. You know, in someone here talked about common good. Can someone just kind of, in your own words, just kind of go over what common good is and why it's important?
Well, when people are good, it's common.
Can anyone think of laws we have that are for the common good that maybe you wouldn't even like to have?
I think like a law like no drugs. Like I think that's for the common good because drugs are just like absolutely horrible for you, and you're making a law for yourself. Like it's like it's to help you, not to just like take drugs away. It's to help your health.
Good answer, thank you.
Okay, Nick, going on with you, you talked about the Great Compromise and how it prevented a war. Do you think we do a lot of compromising up in Lansing today with our lawmakers, or are they often bickering with each other?
I think both because Senator Wojtowski came in and he said they'd get into fist fights, like, and yes, sometimes they will compromise, like on a bill.
So it just takes a long time sometimes, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have a hard time envisioning our legislators in Lansing all fist fights, but it could be true. You know, you talked about the Constitutional Convention, and it was all white men, and today our government is not run like that. So I'm going to assume that you think it's better the way it's run today, as far as who's involved. Can you just talk a little bit about why you think it might be better than the way government is run today? Or at least who gets to run it?
I think the thought of having not only white men is fair because the white men are as good as the African Americans.
So who else besides the African Americans?
The women and Native Americans.
So you think it's better that we have all those people involved?
Yeah,
Why?
because so everybody can at least participate in everything.
Thank you. Are any of you looking forward to running for a political office one day? I didn't think so either.
At the beginning, and anyone can answer this, it was said that people were put in jail for not paying taxes. Do you think that's a law? You have to pay your taxes. So going to jail for not paying your taxes, I guess, should be okay. Does anyone think it's not smart to put people in jail for not paying taxes? And why?
Well, if you put the person in jail, they won't ever be able to pay their taxes because they can't make money in jail. And if you maybe give them a guard that makes them make money immediately, that would be better than putting them in jail and not getting paid.
Okay, our 4-minute period is up. The question that Team 2 came up with is, how many members does each state get to send to the Senate? I'm talking about the federal Senate, U.S. Senate. Number 1, that depends on the population of the state. Number 2, they get to send 50. Number 3, they get to send 1 senator. up into two groups here. This is group lesson or unit 3, but this is group A. And these constitutional experts are Jordan Reed, Claudia Martinez, Neil Carria, and Shania Hurd.
I'm going to talk about what basic ideas the framers had about the preamble to the Constitution. In 1787, the framers wrote and signed the Constitution of the United States. The beginning of the Constitution is called the Preamble. The Preamble explains most of the basic purposes of our government and how it runs. What I think the purpose of the government should be is to protect our rights, which it is. The main idea the framers wanted to put in the Preamble was that it started with "We the people." We wanted to do this because it shows the power to govern belongs to the people, not the government. Some ideas that were in the preamble were that they wanted to make everything in our country as perfect as possible, establish justice, promise everything in our country will be peaceful, give protection to everyone, care for those in need, and secure the blessings of liberty for ourselves and all our children and every generation come. Those are some of the basic ideas the framers had about the Constitution. Now here's Claudia Martinez talking about how the Constitution limits the powers of our government.
When the framers organized our national government, they knew they needed to limit its powers. The government did this by separating them into parts. They called these parts the 3 branches. They gave certain powers to each branch. The powers are, first, legislative branch. The framers gave this branch the power to make laws. They called our national legislature Cummins, executive branch. The framers gave this branch the power to carry out and enforce the laws made by Congress. The president is the head of this branch, judicial branch. The framers gave this branch the power to settle disagreements. The U.S. Supreme Court is the highest to settle these disagreements. The framers used more than one way to limit the powers of our government. They gave each branch ways to check the other branches. Checking powers means that each branch can stop the other branches if a case is brought before the judicial branch. The courts have the power to say that a certain law is not allowed by the Constitution.
The framers created a new federal system of government. In our government, power comes from the people. The people delegate powers to the national or federal government. To delegate means to entrust to someone. We give some powers to the federal government, we give some powers to the state governments, and we also keep some powers to ourselves. So we have a national or federal government, we have state governments, and we have local governments in our towns and cities.
The Supremacy Clause says that states cannot make laws that are in conflict with the United States Constitution. States also cannot make laws that are in conflict with the laws made by Congress. The Constitution limits the powers of both the national and state governments. The national government may not make the laws that favor trade in one state over the other. They may not spend money unless there is a law giving it to approve to do so. They may not tax goods that are leaving the country. The state's government may not coin or print money. They may not engage in more or less action invaded or immediate danger of being invaded. They may not make treaties with other nations. We give some power to our national government. Here's Neil finishing with.
Many framers believed this was enough to protect our rights, but many people refused the Constitution unless there was a Bill of Rights added. That was our presentation on how the Constitution organizes our government. Any follow-up questions?
Yeah, I'm going to start with you since you've got the microphone, Neil. You said that the states get to make laws, federal government makes laws, local government makes laws. If there's a conflict between the state and federal law, which one do you think prevails, and why do you think it prevails?
I think the federal government prevails because it's a bigger government, so I think they would get more power. I think they would get to their law would count because it's a bigger law.
Okay.
But since the state governments are smaller than President Obama's laws, Governor Schneider can't make a bigger law than President Obama's.
Yeah, very good.
Okay, when we have elected representatives who
on new laws for our state or our country, what do you think they have to think about before they vote? And how hard do you think it is for them to represent their people when you do that?
I think it would be a little hard to represent the people because they have to look at what it'll do, which people will it make happy, which people will it make sad, will it hurt the economy, what will the law do. They have to look at all of those things before voting. It's going to be really hard for them to keep all the people happy. There is no way for them to keep every single one of the people happy in the United States.
That's kind of true. I'm going to ask Jordan a little follow-up question about that. So let's just say you're an elected representative and you find out that a lot of people that you represent want you to vote a certain way, and you think to yourself, I just don't agree with that. How do you decide?
Well, I think that you should do what the people say because it's for the common good.
Thank you.
Claudia, you said that the framers had to know that you had to limit powers with the branches of government. How or why did they know that?
They knew that because they didn't want that. They know that if they have too much power, they can do something that other people actually can't do.
Sort of like the king used to do.
Yeah.
Good.
I'm going to go right over to Shania. She looks like she's ready for a question. The president has, by Constitution, can only run for 2 terms. Do you think that's right, or do you think if we really like a president, we should just be able to keep electing him or her?
No, it's not right.
Why?
Because if you really like that one president, he could still keep making good laws for us that we like. But if we get a new president, he might not make the same laws that we like. He might change the laws or do something else we don't like.
So do you think that someone should be able to be a president for a really long time, like 30 years or something?
They should be able to, but if you go on the other side, there are 2 sides to it anyway. Yes, if you want your way, but if you want to look at other people, I would say no, so it wouldn't be fair to other people. So if you look at it, there are 2 sides of the situation.
Thank you.
Okay, 4-minute question period is up, and this is a question that the kids came up with. See if the audience is fifth graders. What are the first words of the preamble to the Constitution? Press 1 if it's something that you see. Press 2 if it's to the people. Press 3 if it's I pledge allegiance. Or press 4 if it's the Constitution states.
Congress is the legislative branch divided into 2 parts, the Senate and the House of Representatives. The framers created the powers of Congress. Article 1 of the Constitution lists some of these powers, such as tax the people, raise army and navy, defend expand our nation, coin money, pass all laws that are necessary, provide general welfare of the United States. In our classroom government, I was part of the legislative branch and was responsible for some of these things. In the House of Representatives must be 25 years old and must have been a citizen for 7 years. The senators must be 30 years old. They must have been a citizen of the United States for 9 years. And both the House of Representatives and the Senate have to live in the state they represent. And they have to be elected to be in the House or the Senate. The Senate serves for 6 years and the House serves for 2 years. The Senate has 100 senators and there are about 435 representatives. If you don't like what the senators or representatives is doing, you email them or don't vote for them next term. Here's some more details about the legislative branch from Michaela.
Congress consists of Senate and House of Representatives. It provides for the welfare of the people by passing laws. An idea becomes a law by a member of the Senate or House of Representatives. They write a proposal. The Congress committee discusses and examines it to decide whether they want to change part of it or if it is a bill. If they decide it's a bill, whoever wrote it gets the members who vote for it. If the member from Senate wrote it, it goes to the Senate first. If the member was from the House of Representatives, it goes to the Senate first. Then it goes to the House that didn't write it for a vote. If it passes in both houses, it is sent to the President for approval. If the President approves it and signs the bill, it becomes a law. If the President doesn't approve it, it gets sent back and it is called a veto. It still becomes a law. The Constitution and the Bill of Rights limits the power of Congress by listing the laws Congress can't make. They can't make laws that unfairly limit freedom of speech. If Congress passes an unfair bill and the President signs it, it becomes a law. But the people's rights can be protected from this law by Supreme Court, which has the power to declare that law unconstitutional. Then the law can be enforced. It is no longer a law. Congress' responsibility is to make laws that protect the rights and welfare of people. They shall learn about problems of the country and find out how to deal with them. Here's something talking about the powers and duties of the President.
What are the powers and duties of the President? The President's head of the executive branch, which means he or she has the power and duty to carry out and enforce laws. For example, the President has the power to direct the military. He or she is the Commander-in-Chief of Armed Forces. The President also has the power to appoint an ambassador and to represent the United States in other countries. A treaty is an official agreement between two countries. The President can make treaties. And every year the President makes a budget. A budget is a plan to show how to spend the nation's money. Just as the President has limits, just as the President has powers, there are also limits. Article 2 of the Constitution limits the powers and duties of the President. For example, the President cannot declare war with other countries without Congress's approval. Another limit of power is the President's veto. The President can veto a bill, but Congress can override the President's veto with a 2/3 vote. Also, the President can be impeached if he is caught doing something illegal. Impeachment means being charged with doing wrong and brought to trial. As former president of my class, I am familiar with the powers and duties of this position of president. Here shall be with how the framers created the executive branch. The executive branch of our government carries out our laws passed by Congress. The President is the head of the executive branch. They wanted to give enough power to carry out and enforce laws, but they did not want to give them unlimited power. Now everyone knows that the first president was George Washington. The framers knew that the president would need help being president. But the framers did not have a plan for that, so Congress created 4 departments to help the president. Department of State helps to handle relations with other countries. Department of Treasury helps to handle the money of the federal government. Department of War helps to defend our nation, and Attorney General helps to be the chief law enforcement officer. This is called the President's Cabinet. Today, a president has many head cabinet
members advising. My opinion is that if we do not have the Constitution, then we do not have the world that we have today. Here's Alyssa talking about what is the judicial branch. The judicial branch interprets the laws. To interpret the laws means to decide what the laws mean. The courts decide if a person is guilty or innocent. If found guilty, they decide how they should be punished. The federal courts deal with problems between the states. They also handle cases that deal with the Constitution and laws by Congress. The judicial branch is organized by national government under the lower courts and the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is the highest court. We call our 9 judges Supreme Court justices. The head of the Supreme Court is the Chief Justice. The framers thought if we elected federal judges, they might not make fair decisions. The President appoints the judges in federal courts. The Senate has to approve each appointment. Federal judges usually serve in office until they either retire or die. Congress can remove federal judges if they are found guilty of a serious crime. Here's Mona talking about the judicial review.
The judicial review is one of the most important powers in the judicial branch. The judicial review is the power of the courts to decide whether the United States Constitution allows a certain law or action of government. Here are some of its powers. Declare an action taken by the President is unconstitutional. Declare state law and is unconstitutional if it conflicts with laws made by Congress. Declare a law made by the Congress is unconstitutional. Suppose the Congress passed a law that says you have to practice a certain religion. It clearly says in the Constitution that Congress can't force you to practice a certain religion. There are limits on the power of federal courts. The Constitution says that judges shall hold their offices during the debating period. The Congress has the power to impeach and remove judges from their office. The President is responsible for enforcing the decisions of the court. The Constitution also says that the judges' salaries cannot be reduced during their time in the office. This means they cannot be punished for decisions they make. That concludes all of our speeches. Any questions?
Senator Mariah, you talked about the Senate and the House of Representatives in Washington. You could magically be in one or the other. Which would you choose and why?
I would like to be in the Senate because you can make bills about how it should be and how stuff goes on and yeah.
That's good. Plus, there's fewer of you, right?
It was talked about that to be there's age requirements to be a senator or in the House of Representatives. Do you think we should have age requirements? I think one was 25 and one was 30. I can't quite remember. Do you think we should have age requirements, or is that important? Why?
Yes, because if you have teenagers, they might not take their job so seriously, and if you
She's taking the fifth. She doesn't want to say anything. I'm going to ask a kind of follow-up on the reverse end of that. When you become a Supreme Court justice, you can be it for life. Do you think that's right? What if a Supreme Court justice is about 900 years old? Should they still be a Supreme Court justice?
No, because they're too old to be working.
Well, I'm 899. Retiring next year, so I'm okay. You're on.
Mona, you talked about the judicial review and how important it was. What do you think would happen if we did not have that?
I think that we let everything else goes very well.
So you want a sense of fairness in the laws. And also you keep the states lower than the federal.
You talked a lot about freedom of expression, and we have dress codes in our schools. Should you be able to wear anything you want in school, or should the school administration be able to make rules, and why?
I think they should have like dress codes, but not really uniforms, because some people like to express themselves in their clothes, and some people but then you should have like a dress code, not like a dress code, but like limit some of the powers on that, because people could wear some inappropriate clothing to school, and it's not right for them.
Thank you. We have more. Okay, go ahead.
It's kind of what Sophie said, but I think that they shouldn't wear like uniforms, because people probably like have their own style like for what they want to wear.
So should kids who go outside on the playground be able to wear flip-flops?
I don't think they should wear flip-flops because they like might hurt themselves while running and
If they're in high school, they could.
In high school, they don't run around and play anymore. They're sneaking off to get a sandwich at the McDonald's. Okay, we talked a lot about limiting powers. Do all of you believe that anyone elected should always have limited powers, or do you think that there should be someone who has a little bit more power? Do you think the president should have a little bit more power than Congress? After all, it is the president.
I think the president should have the same amount of power as Congress, because if he makes if he passes an unconstitutional bill, it won't like be constitutional, and people will think it's like unfair.
Keep honest.
Okay, and now we have a question for the audience that this team put together. And the question is, how many United States Supreme Court justices are there? Press 1 if there are 12. Press 2 if there are 7. Press 3 if there are 9. And press 4 if there are 3. And we have 82% of people who did get the right answer. 9 U.S. Supreme Court justices. Okay, good job. All right, the next group of constitutional experts are going to be talking about how the Constitution protects our basic rights. And these constitutional experts are Kristen Knott, Odell Jones, Natalie Nowicki, Sawyer Slanek, and Aaron DeWong.
Freedom of expression supports our democracy, helps us grow as individuals, it advances knowledge, and makes a change in society. These are all benefits to freedom of expression. Speech, press, assembly, and petition, those are all parts to freedom of expression. Freedom of expression was important to the founders because they wanted everybody to express their feelings about a new government. Before freedom of expression, some people suffered from expressing their feelings, such as Mary Dyer, who was sent to death in 1660 because she spoke out against slavery, war, and death penalty. Sometimes our right to freedom of expression is limited, like when you yell fire when there's not actually a fire. One time, this right to freedom of expression went all the way to the Supreme Court. The case was Feiner versus New York. On the evening of March 8, 1951, Irving Feiner stood on top of a box, making speeches about equal rights and starting a riot. He was arrested. The Eventually it came to the Supreme Court. The decision was 6-3. He was guilty. This is a time when his freedom of expression was limited. Another example of when freedom of expression is limited is some people in our class like to talk. That distracts other students from learning, so Ms. Cummins has to limit our freedom of expression. Now here's Odell Jones talking about freedom of religion.
The Bill of Rights states Congress shall make no laws respecting about any established clause of religion or prohibiting the free exercise of freedom. Establishment clause means Congress may not settle one's religion that favors over others. The free exercise clause means Congress can't stop you from having and not having a religion. They also can't stop you from practicing your religion. The many colonists from here to the New World looked for religious freedom. The Puritan had a different belief. Anyone that disagreed with it was persecuted or executed. Roger Williams had married. His wife wanted the church to be tolerant in other beliefs. Tolerant means opinion. Puritan leaders got mad, so they forced them to leave. Now there are beliefs like Baptists, Catholics, Buddhism, and many more. This was important to founders because it took away people's rights and not good for the common good. This is also called discriminating people for the religious beliefs. To discriminate means to treat unfairly. We have the rights to have a religion or not. This is called freedom of belief or conscience. This means the government can't put limits on our freedom of religion. The free exercise clause protects us from our right to practice our beliefs. Now here's Natalie talking about how does the Constitution protect your right to equal protection of the laws.
The 14th Amendment was passed to keep state governments from discriminating against African Americans. It states, no state shall deny to any person the equal protection of laws. This means that state governments must not treat people unfairly unless you have a good reason. But many states had laws that were unfair to African Americans and violated the 14th Amendment. For example, they segregated black and white schools and separated entrances by the color of your skin. In 1954, an important court case called Brown v. Board of Education helped end segregation in schools. Still, people continue to be discriminated against. Through the civil rights movement, people tried to end unfair treatment of others. They boycotted companies, protested, wrote petitions. With the help of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and many Americans, we finally got Congress to pass the Civil Rights Act. The Equal Protection Clause helped people to realize that everybody should have been treated fairly. To me, everyone should have been treated fairly, no matter who you are. Now here's Sawyer talking about how the Constitution protects your right to due process of law.
Due process of law means that members of the government must use fair methods or procedures when doing their jobs. This is guaranteed through the Fifth Amendment from the federal government and through the 14th Amendment from the local government. Due process rights are important in your daily life because you have the right to be treated fairly by all agencies of your government. Due process is important to criminal trials because it is very important that you understand the meaning of fair procedures in enforcing the law. The Bill of Rights says that if you are accused of a crime, you have the right to have a lawyer defend you. Back in 1963, there was a Supreme Court case named Gideon versus Wainwright. The case was about a poor man accused of stealing a pint of wine and taking some coins from a cigarette machine. He was too poor to afford a lawyer, and the court wouldn't give him one because the court only gives lawyers when there's a murder case. Gideon wrote a petition to the Supreme Court. He argued that all citizens have the right to have a lawyer. The United States Supreme Court ruled that the court is to provide an attorney in criminal cases for defendants who are unable to afford to pay an attorney. Now to Aaron.
The framers could not agree who should have the right to vote, so they left it up to the state government. Earlier, only white men who owned property could vote. They did that because they thought that they would have much to lose if the bad government came in power. But then later, after the Constitution was adopted, it said that all white men could vote. The 15th Amendment was made and it gave the right to vote to African Americans too. Yet some southern states passed laws that made it nearly impossible for African Americans to vote. Some of the ways they did ask by having a literacy test. It was a test to prove that a person can read and write. Most African Americans have been denied of education. They made these tests purposely so they wouldn't pass them. Also, states use a poll tax. The poll tax required the person to pay to vote, and since most African Americans have just gotten out of slavery, they're poor. People of all races came together to change unfair law. These actions became known as the Civil Rights Movement. In the result of the Civil Rights Movement in 1964, a 24th Amendment was passed. It says that the right to vote shall not be denied because a person fails to pay a poll tax or any other tax. But everyone still wasn't happy. So in 1965, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was made. It further protected the right to vote to all citizens. Women also fought for a long time to vote. After the Civil War, women supported the 15th Amendment. They tried hard to gain their right to vote at the same time. The most important person in the fight for women's right to vote was Susan B. Anthony. She was arrested for illegally voting. She was fined $100, but she refused to pay. Then the judge decided not to make her. A 19th Amendment was passed, and it gave women the right to vote. 18-year-olds also wanted to vote too. They said that if they can fight the wars, why can't they vote? So then the 26th Amendment was passed, and it gave them the right to vote. Are there any questions?
I'll start. Should 18-year-olds get to drink then too? Or do anything else that they choose to do?
No.
Why not?
Because I don't know.
You're right, though. Sometimes it takes more experience before you can do certain things.
Well, I don't think they should be able to because they're still like about to go to college or in college. And when they're in college, they should be worrying about their grades and not worrying about drinking alcohol and stuff. So I think they shouldn't be able to.
Oh, okay, I'm going to ask another question about rights because you talked a lot about that. So in some religions, it's very important to those people in their religious practice to have bells at their church that they would play out loud. So you live in a neighborhood, and there's a church that plays their bells out loud, and they do it all day, or at least different times during the day. And you don't like that, because you work midnights, you want to sleep. What should our court system decide on that?
Odell, that's your question. You have a list.
I think that the court should still have the bell, but not play it at the time that's right for them, and not at midnight.
All right. So you think maybe just limit on how they use the bells then? All right. Thank you.
Houston, I get a gavel when I chair township board meetings so that I can tell people to stop talking or in some cases to start talking. You talk about freedom of expression. Doesn't that limit their freedom of expression if I tell them they have to stop talking? Should everybody be allowed to talk whenever they want at a township board meeting?
No.
Why?
Because you got to talk about stuff, pass laws.
But what happened if everyone in here started talking to each other whenever they chose to?
It wouldn't be fair to us because we worked so hard on our speeches and they're not listening.
You deserve that courtesy, don't you? Good.
And furthermore, no one should ever mess with a man in a checked hat. I have a question about the internet. There's a lot of weird stuff there. Should the government say, you can't put all that stuff on the internet, or should you just be able to put whatever you want?
I think that you shouldn't be able to put whatever you want on the internet because
some people, the government needs to limit what people put on there or what people are saying on there, because some of it you don't either need to see or you don't really, like, your parents might not want you to see it because it's either inappropriate or they don't think you're old enough for it. So I think that your freedom of expression should be limited for what you're putting on the internet.
Thank you. Good answer.
And that concludes our 4-minute session here. So now, the kids have put together this question here. The audience is 5th grader. The question is, the 19th Amendment allows which group of people to vote? Press 1 if it's African Americans. Press 2 if it's women. Press 3 if it's men. Press 4 if it's year-olds. And we have 72% people that did give the right answer. Yeah. Our next and our last group of constitutional experts are going to be talking about what responsibilities we have as citizens. And these experts are Sierra Cash, Sean Patel, Dante Case Hall, and Ryan Savage.
Other countries have influenced the United States by teaching us about the republican government, civic virtue, and the common good. Countries of the world interact through culture, science, business exchanges, and treaties and agreements, and military forces. The U.S. Constitution gives power to the different branches of the government to deal with other countries, like the Congress controls trades with other countries, and the President leads military forces, and the U.S. Supreme Court hears cases involving ambassadors. Declaration of Independence and the United States and the Bill of Rights influence other countries with ideas. The power comes from the people, and the people are the unlimited sources of the authority of their government. People in the government are the sign of the people. They are not the master of the people. All people are political equals. People delegate some of their powers to the government, and the purpose of the government is to protect their rights and promote the common good. Now passing this time with the responsibilities of citizens.
A citizen is a member of a political body, such as nation or state. A citizen is born in the United States. Born in the United States, living in another country. Born elsewhere, living legally in the United States, and pass a test on the Constitution and history of the United States, become a naturalized citizen. Children of naturalized citizens who are under the age of 18 when their parents became citizens. People who are not citizens are called resident aliens. Resident aliens enjoy most of the rights of citizens. They have the right to due process of law as a citizen. Resident aliens do not have the right to vote, serve on jury, or run for public office. But resident aliens have to obey the law. My mom was living in India and she met my dad when she was 22. She got married to my dad in India. After they got married, they went to America, but she was not a citizen. She had to take the test. She studied for 2 years, and she had my brother, but she still had to take a test. So she took the test when she was pregnant with me. She passed it to become a citizen. So when I was born, I was already a citizen. I'm the part that Dante is going to talk about if a good constitution is enough to protect your rights and what responsibilities go along with these rights.
The framers planned our government carefully. They organized it so its powers were limited. They separated the powers of our government among two different branches. They balanced the powers among
these branches. They provide ways each branch could check or limit the powers of the other branches. Finally, they added a Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights now protects our rights from unfair treatment by our nation's state and local government. Today, most people agree that a well-written Constitution is not enough to protect our rights. We need to elect leaders who will make and enforce laws that protect our rights and promote our welfare. Even a good Constitution and good leaders may not be enough. If we want to protect our rights and welfare, we the people have certain responsibilities to fulfill. Let's examine what some of these responsibilities might be. We have the right to freedom of expression. Suppose you attend a meeting of students in your school. The main reason of the meeting is about the playground. Every student has the right to speak, but along with that is everyone's responsibilities to listen to everyone's point of view. The right to freedom of religion is another one of our rights. Suppose you believe in a particular religion. You have the right to attend a church, meeting, hall, or temple in your community, but you also have the responsibilities to be tolerant of other people's religions. Now I'll pass it to Ryan, who is going to talk about the common good.
The purpose of our government is to protect our life, liberty, and property. In Republican government, citizens have a duty to serve the common good. Citizens work with the government to make it good for the whole community. We also have to put aside our self-interests and do what's right for the common good. Sometimes the common good is quite clear. For example, everybody needs to live in a healthy environment. We need to be protected by armed forces. But sometimes it's hard to decide between our self-interests. We can also participate in our government by reading the newspapers and watching television. Also, if there is someone in our government that we do not like, we the people will not vote for them again. Thomas Jefferson once said, if a nation expects to be ignorant and free, it expects what never was and what never will be. We have inherited a free society. It is our society. We are free to make the choice of what kind of citizen we want to be. We can help promote the common good. We all plan to be good citizens and make the common good a better place for all of us. Now we are ready for your follow-up questions.
Yeah, I'll start with you, Ryan. Years ago, and I don't know if it's still true, you could not put up political signs here in Rivergate for elections. And we would get calls at the Township asking us to come over and enforce the subdivision rule of no political signs. Do you think we did, A? And B, do you think it's for the common good that you don't have political signs?
Actually, I don't really understand that question.
I don't know if you can't put political signs in your front yard here in Rivergate, the subdivision. Subdivision rule. It used to be. People would call me and tell me to come take down political signs in people's front yards at election time. Do you think, A, that I would do it? And B, do you think it's for the common good that I would do it?
I think B, for the common good.
Think it's better not to have political signs? Or do you think you should be able to express yourself?
Oh, wait, I meant A. Oh, sorry.
So do you think that I would come over and tell someone to take their sign down?
Probably not.
No, you're right. And then keeping on the same theme of common good, Dante, you also talked about that. Years ago, everybody could pick whatever garbage company they wanted. So you had 4 or 5 companies coming down your street, and if you paid your money to that company, they would take your garbage away. We decided that that was just too much on our streets and it was confusing. So we said, you have to use our garbage company that we're going to tell you you have to use. Do you think we did it for the common good, or do you think we did it to make money?
We did it to make money.
Listen, every day I'm trying to figure out how to make money. Do you think We did it for the common good. But if I could figure out how to make money, we would.
There's a lot of talk in our government about people who come to this country to live here and want to become citizens. Do you think that our country should allow people from the outside to come here to live and to become citizens?
Yes, because if we pass like the test for the Constitution and history, they're allowed to vote, and more votes means the state has more population.
Thank you. This is a little bit different, but right now there's a lot of talk about rules about how we hire people. And do you think that people who commit crimes should get jobs?
Well, yeah, because like you just have to like see if they really did something, because like sometimes the murder that they did is not really that bad, but some of them can be like really bad to where you don't want to hire them, and where you think they'd do something to someone else. That's like how bad it'll probably be.
So then you think that maybe sometimes people who commit crimes can be good citizens again then?
Yeah, like they can change. Like they don't have to be the same person anymore.
Thanks.
The United States is referred to as the world's policeman. Do you think that's good or bad? You know what a policeman is? They make sure everybody behaves.
What was the question again?
Our country has been referred to as the world's policeman. We keep order. Is that good or bad?
That's good, actually. So people don't do bad crimes, and to make sure our United States is safe.
Okay, well, our 1 minute question time is up, so we do have one last question for our audience. And this team of students came up with this question. Which one is a right that resident aliens have? Do they have the right to be processed